To efficiently manipulate objects in clutter like the ones that we see here, we need to infer their mechanical properties and also their shapes, their 3D shapes. And this is known as shape completion or 3D shape completion, volumetric shape completion. And this is what I will be explaining now. So what we have in this problem, we have an input, which is just the RGBD image of objects. And on the right side, we have output, which corresponds to completed shapes of these objects. And of course, the input is partial point cloud, where we can see only the surface of the objects, and we don't see a lot, most of it we don't see it. So I like to call this a dark matter, as just analogy to what happens with the universe. And the idea here is to use physics to infer the hidden part, the dark matter of the objects, the things that we don't see. And actually, the analogy is also holds here. So in the universe, we infer the existence of dark matters based on gravitational lenses and all that, and the effect that the interactions that happen between that matter and the other objects. So what we'll be using here is using physics reasoning to infer the parts that we don't see about the objects. And one example of this is this application where you have a robot searching for an object inside the drawer where you have a lot of other objects. So the robot would be pushing the objects around, poking them, and trying to free space and trying to move them around in order to reveal the hidden object that it's looking for. And as it's pushing the object, it's observing how the objects are moving, and it can infer the size of the objects, even if they are occluded. And if they stop moving, that means that they are colliding with another object, etc. So this is the first part, which is how we just collect data. We have a robot that pokes the objects slowly and moves them and observes how they are moving. And from there, we want to reconstruct the 3D shape of all the objects that we have in front of us. So the first thing to do is obviously just segmentation, and segmentation can be done in unsupervised way using one of the many existing methods that we have for that. There are very efficient methods for segmentation, and they work quite well. You just need some mild assumptions about the shape of objects, like they are convex shapes, etc. Then you need to define the region where you know the shape of the object, visible region, and also the hidden region. And you want to generate in the hidden region all possible shapes that the objects can have. So we can call this shape hypothesis. And this process here is called shape hypothesis generation. So based on just the part that you see, you want to grow this part into all possible shapes. And you can do this by mirroring the shape, by using some kind of morphing techniques of the shape, and creating all sorts of facets that kind of reflect what you see, or it could be very general. So we have continuum, of course, of possible shapes here. So you need to have some constraints in order to make this a little bit more efficient. So this is an example where we have a scene, and the only thing we see there on the left side is just two sides of the cube, and then we want to complete the shape of the cube. So first thing we do, we can generate a set of possible hypotheses by playing with those visible parts and then mirroring them and then creating all sorts of kind of geometric shapes based on that. So you need to do this with all the objects that you see in the scene. So you see some of them are cylinders, some of them are cuboids, some of them have different shapes, etc. So you just generate a large set of hypotheses for each object in the scene, based on the part that you see. And then at the end, you want to score the shape of each object based on how much it matches the observations. And the way we do this is we can take those models and then put them in simulation and then try to replicate the actions and the forces that have been applied on these objects. So we have two main kinds of forces. We have gravity forces, and we have the forces that are applied by the robot, like poking, pushing forces. We also have friction forces, of course, and we have also contact forces between the objects. So we want to simulate all of that, and then we select at the end the model hypothesis that explain better the observations that we have seen. So this is an example. Let's say the robot from the angle where it is, it can only see a part of the book, and then it's trying to push the book on the right side to rotate it, and then it observes certain motion. And then you want to choose a model of the book that matches the kind of rotation that you observed in reality. And then at the end, you want to score each model based on how accurate the simulation that results from using that model is. Let's look into a very simple example where we have, let's assume that we have this cube where you can only see the top of the cube and you don't see anything below. And obviously, this model is not accurate because it would lead into the book falling off and dropping, and that's not what we observed. So this is very unlikely. Although there is still small probability for this because it may be just a thin layer and then there is something supporting it below. So it's all a matter of probabilities. We cannot say for sure that this is not the correct hypothesis. Let's look into. So this is more likely that it is actually. The shape is actually a sort of cube and not just a small surface. And let's look into another example which is slightly more interesting. And in this example, let's say we see only this segment, the book, and then we want to generate all possible hypotheses for it and then choose the one that matches with the observed motion of the book, that actually agrees with what we see in reality. And let's say we push the book and then it rotates in a certain way. Now we're going to compare the result of this simulation with what we have seen and what we have tracked using SIFT tracking on the real experiment. Look at how this book rotated. So this leads, there is a huge reality gap in this case actually. So this rotation doesn't match with this kind of rotation. The angle is not exactly the same and all of that, which means that this model has very low probability. But if you use this model, which is actually assumes that the book is much bigger than what it looks like, and then this would explain the way it rotated, and you can see that the rotation of the book in this case, as we push it to the right side and collides with this red box, actually matches with the observed motion in reality. So this is the principle. You want to both take the gravity forces, friction forces, interaction forces, and also the forces applied by the robot, and from there you want to reconstruct the shape of all the objects in this scene. And in this case we have perfect match, so we have much higher probability model. So we want to do this in globally for all the objects, and we need to reconstruct basically the scene in simulation under all these forces, and then at the end choose the models that agree the most with the observed motions. And this corresponds to global optimization problem that will be solved, and combinatorial optimization problem actually, because you have all sorts of interactions between different objects. And the way we can solve this is by using Monte Carlo tree research. And to do this, you need to define an order in which you start simulating the objects, because each object can depend on a lot of other objects physically. So the way we do this is it's a Monte Carlo tree research in space of hypotheses, joint hypothesis of shapes of all objects. And you want to simulate first the shape of one object, and then you go to another object, etc. And then at the end, once you got the shapes of all the objects, you want to score them based on how realistic that simulation is. So we need to find kind of graph of dependencies between the objects. And the way we do this is we simulate each object separately, one by one, under only gravity, and with different hypotheses, of course, for their shapes. And then we select the one that is more stable, the most stable, and that would become the root of the tree research. So this is the initial object. We fix this object and we assign it a shape that most explain its behavior under gravity and also agrees with the observed part of the object. Then you want to repeat at each level of this tree. You want to pick an object and then search through all possible hypotheses of shapes that it can have. And this is very long search, so you want to use the upper confidence bound, for example, for trading off exploration with exploitation. And this is a very standard trick in Monte Carlo tree research. So we do this with, at second level, we have to pick another object that we want to assign hypothesis for, and we will be selecting again the object that is more stable, and we assign it a shape. So we repeat this for all different objects. At each level, we'll be just choosing an object and then searching through all possible shapes it can have, and then assign it the best shape. At the end, this gives us, so I'm just do this with few objects, and then at the end what this gives us is a complete assignment of a shape for each object. And we want to evaluate basically the quality of this branch, how accurate this particular assignment is. And before doing that, we need also to simulate the actions that the robot applied on the objects and score each scene based on how much the simulation agrees with the observation. So in this case, we have the robot pushed only the yellow and orange object, and what we are doing here is we are simulating the pushing actions and their different shape hypotheses. At the end, you get a complete assignment of shapes, and then you have a score for it, and then you go into the top of the tree and you repeat again the same process, and at the end you select the best possible explanation. So this is the result that we obtained. What you have on top is the input, which is an image and with the depth information from single view, and then what we got in the middle is the reconstructed scene in simulation by inferring the hidden parts of the objects and their physical constraints. And then what you have at the bottom is the same scene, but how it looks like from the back, okay, according to this shape reconstruction. So the shapes are not very perfect, but actually they are good enough for manipulation and for planning. You can reason about the objects very well with that. We did some comparisons with two methods that try to do the same thing, and we obtained much better intersection over union and F1 score on YCB objects. This is a standard data set. We also compared actually with the recent deep learning based shape completion methods, and they didn't work very well because they require a lot of data, and our method doesn't require any data beyond the data that we receive on the fly in real time as we are manipulating the objects. So with deep learning methods, we obtained only like 10% IOU. We didn't report this because it just didn't work actually. And we can definitely combine the power of deep learning in the hypothesis generation. So it can give us priors, and then those priors can be verified using this Monte Carlo research and physics reasoning to refine them and to select the best ones. Of course, this explains now how to complete shapes of objects, but the question that remains unanswered here is how can we figure out the mass and friction of each one of these objects, and that's what we will be explaining in the following.